I'm Tian and welcome to World Insight. The 77th session of the UN General Assembly opened recently with the theme, A Watershed Moment, Transformative Solutions to Interlocking Challenges. It's a recognition that the world faces complex and interconnected crises, including the pandemic, Russia-Ukraine conflict, unprecedented humanitarian and climate challenges. The Red Cross says more than 140 million people faces severe food insecurity as a result of conflicts, while climate change and economic instability could worsen hunger. How deeper and wider could these crises affect vulnerable countries? What are the prospects for global security initiative? For answers, I talked to President of the International Committee of the Red Cross. Take a listen. Mr. President, what a pleasure to see you once again. How do you see the work of yours has been evolving over the past 10 years?
First, let me just highlight that when we look at how humanitarian needs have developed over the last 10 years, conflict and violence have been the main drivers of humanitarian needs. And if the budgets of my organization and many other organizations have grown, it's because conflicts and violence has expanded. We have, of course, witnessed in the course of this evolution and this demand, and in recent years, we have seen as well that increasingly not only war were fought on sea, on land, but also in the space and in cyberspace. So all these transformations have influenced heavily the way we deliver services, the way people experience needs.
But Mr. President, if you think about the changes of the world, the geopolitics, pandemic, it's not just what you just described from different spaces that the crises are happening, but also the nature of crisis and how the solutions can be drawn. So from that perspective, would you help us to understand this transformation?
Well, I would agree with you that what we have seen is an increasing intersection of many problems at the same time. And many have referred to what we experience today as a perfect storm. As you said, climate change has its dynamics, the pandemic have its dynamics of socioeconomic impact on societies. War and violence have become and have spread in many places of the world. And therefore, I do believe that humanitarian organization can help stabilize in the worst of situations, stabilize societies, but they can't really go to the root causes. In order to solve the root causes, we would need an international system and cooperation between states to be much more ambitious than what a humanitarian organization can do. And I am the first one to appreciate what we were able to do, but also to draw the attention of political leaders to the fact that it needs political action to have stronger governance over these issues. And they need stronger institutions, stronger processes, stronger cooperation between states. What humanitarians can do is basically build minimal trust in divided societies, in war-torn societies, and assist and protect populations from the worst. I talk to you today, as you know, from the margin of the General Assembly High-Level Week in New York. And it is obvious that in this place, more than in any other place, you are aware how important political leadership would be to bring us into more calmer waters.
We have seen the international governance system being weakened. What are you going to use as tools in order to make up to the vacuum that they have left as a result of being weakened over the years?
It is true that the system as a whole had difficulties dealing with the political issues. And we all know, listening to our discussion, how difficult it has been to find a consensus between the major power, between regional powers. So I don't want to underestimate. For us, operational organization, the main focus will be what can we do together in order to increase impact for people, because people in Africa, in the Middle East, in Afghanistan, in Central America, in Latin America, they all suffer from the impact of war and violence, from climate change, from disruption, from complex needs. And I think we have really tried hard to have an integrated view on these needs. I give you an example. When we are in the Sahel, we do not just bring humanitarian relief. We try to strengthen communities to deal with the impact of climate change. We look for more sustainable use of resources, water, and other resources which are used. So I think those with operational capacities have really made headway forward to cooperate on the ground, to see that we deliver services to people. And probably the effort have paid so that the situation could not degrade further. I mean, we are still in a serious situation of humanitarian needs, but also we have been able to stabilize certain areas and at least to maintain basic social services for people.
How the world has been focusing their attention on conflict solving and humanitarian support, whether that is rightly shared the resources.
For me, it is inconsistent and unquestionable that we have a systemic structural issues which kept food away from too many vulnerable people. Of course, the Ukraine war and the blockages of exports from Ukraine and Russia onto the world market has affected many countries and has further put them to a brink. But I think we shouldn't just put every reason only to the war. I think this is a long-term structural issue, and it will need long-term structural responses. Imagine tomorrow we would see all the Ukrainian grain and all the Russian grain and fertilizers come to the world market. We would still, again, have a systemic problem of underproduction of agriculture, of injustice of resources, and people who don't have the income and don't have the money to really afford a safe and good nutrition. Humanitarian assistance can prevent the worst, but it needs much more elaborate support in order to have more sustainable solutions for the food problem, not only in Africa, but in many other places of the world.
How is your organization try to maintain the possibility of neutrality and try to work with everyone in those conflicts so that you can present the best solution to those you need to help?
Well, first, let me say, we are continuously convinced that in order to be able to be neutral, we need to be able to have objective assessments of needs and respond to those needs. And this is only possible at the same time if we engage with all sides and all parties, and if we are present and see with our own eyes what the problem is, and so that we can target humanitarian assistance according to needs and not according to political engagement. It's much more complex today because we have much more actors in most of the places in which we operate, and the major powers are much more divided, and therefore moving to consensus on humanitarian issues is difficult. And therefore, my second point would be, here again, we do need political leadership, which also recognizes that people have a right to dignity. And if people have a right to dignity, powers need to converge on some minimal services to those populations which are particularly affected by the multiple crises that you have mentioned.
How would you make sure, the literacy of your organization to understand the differences and diversities and work with these different partners to get the best resources for your work?
Well, I think the magic of being able to do what you ask is at the end of the day to be present. We need to have access. Once we have access, we can talk to all sides. We can listen to their specific needs and we can try to respond. And we can, in responding also, build capacities, skills, transfer knowledge. But I think we can't do that in an abstract way. If we are able to work in the most difficult situation, this is also because we want then to engage with those parties and use concrete opportunities. We are not an organization believing in abstract teaching of international humanitarian law.
Just to follow up, your organization has been working quite closely with China over the years. During your term, that it has been very obvious you travel in and out of the region and even to China several times. So, Mr. President, how would you describe this working relationship? How do you see, China as one of the P5 and overall the emerging economies, developing world, the so-called global South, playing their roles this time?
Well, may I just maybe pick up at my previous response. When we are in the middle of conflict, we want to talk to everybody who is carrying a weapon in order to ensure access and to be able to assist and protect populations. If we look broader, we have an ambition to talk to everybody who has an influence on conflict. Such a strong economy and such a strong political player like China has influences which are important in order to expand our possibility to work. And I have always thought during my time as a president, dialogue and cooperation with everybody who had an influence on parties to conflict wherever in the world. And there is no secret with the increased also political ambition of China, it became more important for an organization like mine to be cognizant of China's reading of a situation, to also see where China had influences through which we could expand our work, which at the end of the day is a work in favor of more stable international arena. And I understand this is an objective which is very much also in sync with China's international efforts.
How do you see the lack of systemic approaches the world still is at this moment after doing your work for decades to support those in great needs?
Well, we do obviously have a challenge with the longevity of crises, but also with the long-term impact of crises. How do we build a continuous stream of support from humanitarian to development to governance and peace and security actors? And it is one of the very crucial issues the international community is still dealing with. And what we experience so often is that when the conflict is ending, very often the cameras disappear. And the cameras are not anymore on the conflict. And when the cameras are away, people, organizations, international public opinion starts to be disinterested. It's one of the big issues because the attention of the international community and the attention of international public opinion is not equitably distributed. And unfortunately, in today's world, we have a big number of inequities of attention.
You have been serving your post for 10 years, and many have been extremely impressed about what you and under your leadership, your team achieved over the past 10 years. But once leaving and away from the organization, what do you think might be eventually the takeaway in your heart?
Well, look, when you are dealing with the issues I dealt with after 10 years, you have a bunch of experiences of personal relations, of suffering, but also of joy when maybe some programs have been successful. And I think you come away of that job of 10 years with an enormous richness of experience about what humanitarianism can be in today's world. And it is one of the very satisfying activities one can do. I have been 25 years of my life a diplomat, and I was not unhappy to be a diplomat, but I must say the proximity of being touched by heartbreaking events is something which is an important takeaway. And heartbreaking is not negative always. It has many times been positive. And what I take away is also the optimism and the hope that we could bring to so many when they saw that we were there, despite the difficulties, to be so close to where conflict and war happened. So it has been a very satisfying experience.
Thank you for your contribution, bringing hope to many that are urgently needing it. Thank you so much.